Hello, welcome back to Movie Husbands. Today we're reviewing Maestro. Directed by Bradley Cooper, Maestro centers on the relationship between American composer Leonard Bernstein and his wife Felicia. The film stars Bradley Cooper, Carey Mulligan, Matt Bomer, Maya Hawke, and Sarah Silverman. So Jeffrey, what did you think about Maestro?
So I'd say Bradley Cooper is kind of an interesting filmmaker because the only film we have to go off of is A Star is Born. Obviously, he has a storied, quite long career of acting performances from prestige to lowbrow. Even lowbrow I enjoy. I mean, he was in The Hangover. There's a wide variety of roles in his career. I've always appreciated him for that, and I found him to be a really dynamic actor. The one film he's made before Maestro was A Star is Born, which I found to be quite skillful. I thought was really elegantly made as a filmmaker, and also featured some extremely strong performances all around from Sam Elliott, Lady Gaga, and Bradley Cooper himself. After seeing Maestro, I think Bradley Cooper's simply got the juice.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a particularly subtle film, but all of its achievements are bombastic and showy, but no less impressive, frankly, and probably far more impressive than A Star is Born. I don't know if I found this film quite as emotionally impacting as that film was, but it's just as impressive, if not more so, on a technical level. Just to give an example, one of the first shots in this film is this insane sweeping medium shot that becomes a moving overhead shot that morphs into a drone shot into the auditorium when he learns that he's going to be guest conducting for the first time. It's quite a feat of camera work and of editing that, frankly, a lot of very seasoned filmmakers wouldn't even think to attempt. It's a good precursor for how this film approaches style. The film focuses almost entirely on the Bernstein marriage and interpersonal troubles that they have. And I like that approach because it seemed to avoid this feeling I always get with biopics that we're checking off boxes. So I think maybe if you're going to see a Leonard Bernstein biopic, you would think, okay, this is the part where he writes West Side Story, and this is the part where he does his conducting of the Philharmonic. And this film has those moments subtly, but really it's a lot more interested in this marriage that he has with his wife, Felicia. We show these dates, we have these life events, and a lot of times I think in biopics that can be fairly unfulfilling, but this is a much more personal rendering of this person's life. At the same time, I think I can understand how somebody could say that it simply doesn't have enough of the man's achievements. I didn't feel that way, but I could understand that. But I found the film really compelling.
I love how his achievements were slightly woven into the film without over-focusing on them. In that regard, I enjoyed it because it's a reminder of how these people are more than just their accolades. They have personal lives as well. This movie was filmed with the input of his living children, which I think is very beneficial in this case because there are a lot of scenes that involve them in it. Going to what you said, I thought this film was absolutely to die for. I thought this biopic...
To die for?
Yes, I thought it was to die for.
Yeah.
I loved it. I felt like this biopic played as almost two distinct films. I loved how the first half played as this old Hollywood black and white fantasy romantic type movie, and the second half played as this more colorful and emotional drama. Starting with the first half, I adored how these sweeping camera moments that you were talking about earlier, they followed the characters not only through space but through time. So those scenes that you were mentioning, they were almost as little precursors to the next moment in a different time period.
Yeah, the film's amazingly edited, and there are scenes in which they'll walk behind stage or walk backstage, and then they'll suddenly be in a room in their house, things like that.
And another one of my favorite shots follows Carey Mulligan's character down a street. This is really subtle for me, and I'm not sure if any people will notice it, but one of these shots follows her from behind as she's walking up to a house party on the street, and there's just antique cars in the street. There's a lamppost which is giving this nice light, and the house, you could see the party in the distance. There were so many foreground and background elements, and the focus on her, and the camera is lowered to the ground, follows her from that angle. It was just, I love that shot.
I think people should see this film however they can see it, and if that means they're going to watch it on Netflix on Christmas Day, I think that's great. If you happen to be able to see this in a theater, I would highly encourage it. And I know I say that for a lot of films, but this film especially, because this film feels so classically, intelligently cinematic in ways that we rarely see nowadays. That's not to diminish anything that's going on nowadays and is more progressive in film, but this film feels like a throwback in all the best ways, in my opinion. This is something that would win 11 Oscars in the 80s or the early 1990s. And it has a crowd-pleasing effect, and I think a very resonant film style. There's one sequence in this film, it's an unbroken take when he's conducting a Mahler
I have
symphony.
so many notes on this moment.
Oh, okay. So yeah, we can go right into that if you want. not, it's a scene that's very exciting from a sound perspective, but also very, very exciting from a cinematic perspective. There was an audible gasp or almost relief when the shot was over from our audience, and you could tell that they were very into it. And I was like, okay, wow, this audience is into this as much as I was into this. And we saw this in a very packed theater. I just think it has some of those movie moments, those golden age of Hollywood moments that we just don't get a lot.
That's what I was going to say. This scene in particular, I thought almost transcended the one movie off. It's this one take scene that sweepingly flows over the orchestra right to Bradley Cooper's character. You get all the close-ups and the emotion, and then it slowly backs back out and reveals the orchestra again, at which point we finally get a cut. But the raw, intimate emotion that we get from that scene, Bradley Cooper, I want to get into the whole acting portion of this conversation in a bit, but that was just absolutely amazing. And I feel like transcended one of those golden age moments of film that I hope is remembered for time to come.
I can't imagine the feat of being a director, but also being an actor in this film. Maybe in a sense, I don't want to say it's easier, but you're developing how the film looks and your pivotal performance at the same time. I'd be really interested to read some interviews or maybe listen to Bradley Cooper talk a little bit about how he developed both the film and his performance at the same time. But I think what I was most interested in his performance is that he's utterly convincing as Leonard Bernstein. I think we've seen films where somebody is just doing this vague impression of somebody that we know. And Leonard Bernstein, I think, is a big enough figure that we know how he looks, we know how he speaks, but this film never makes him into an SNL impression. The performance is very mannered, but it's also quite realistic. I mean, I don't think we ever forget about his humanity in this film, even as he's being somebody that's being imitated on screen.
To be honest, I haven't really seen much of Leonard Bernstein himself conducting, so I went and watched some videos on YouTube.
Oh, did you? Cool.
Yeah, because I wanted to get a sense of Bradley Cooper's performance here and what it was like. The mannerisms, like everything, the facial reactions that he has, there is this euphoric sense of personality in Bernstein's face when he conducts. And I thought Bradley Cooper just absolutely nailed that. You were talking about him directing and starring in this movie at the same time. I want to add writing because he co-wrote this movie with Josh Singer. So that's a third thing on his plate that he had to handle. To be able to, direct is one thing, to be able to act, to be able to write, but to do all three of those things and nail every single one of those things at such a high level of proficiency, I think is really commendable.
I want to stop saying imitate and more embody Leonard Bernstein. And the way that he embodies Leonard Bernstein throughout many different eras of his life. Like, think about the way that when he first meets Carey Mulligan's character and he says, "Hi, I'm Lenny," and he has this youthful exuberance about him, versus, the last couple scenes where I think he's in his 70s, he's at the end of his life, and he's reflecting on everything. His voice is quite a bit more rough, and just the way he speaks is a lot slower. It's a lot more mournful. So to be able to master each part of this person's documented life, and again, at any time, you and I could go onto YouTube and we could look at what Leonard Bernstein was like when he was 40 and what he was like when he was 30 and what he was like when he was 70. And to be able to embody all of that so perfectly is just yet another level of something to be impressed by here.
Yeah, and on that note, I guess we could call hair and makeup stylists a very impressive part of that. I mean, you don't have the believability of his age, and Bradley Cooper is obviously not 70-year-old in this movie. Yeah. So to be able to transition from him being very youthful in his early 30s and then going to his late 70s to show all that and have it be very believable from a makeup department aspect, I think was really well done as well.
So we got to talk about Carey Mulligan.
We have to talk about
Carey Mulligan. This is oddly, she steals the show somehow. I mean, Bradley Cooper is amazing in this movie, but a lot of the heart of the film really lies in Carey Mulligan. And in many ways, she's the checks and balances to Leonard Bernstein's very bigger than life personality. This film, something else I like about it that's not a traditional biopic is this film really explores his flaws in a very unique way, in both his infidelities and some of his social relationships and his marriage. And Carey Mulligan is always there to remind us of what Leonard Bernstein actually is, both the good and the bad, and bring him back to reality, which I really like. There's an absolutely stunning scene that takes place on Thanksgiving morning. For as much as the camera moves and is trying to inject all of this energy into the film, Bradley Cooper also knows how to make something very quiet and very affecting. And there's a scene, it's a single unbroken shot. I don't think that it moves at all. I don't think the camera
I don't think so, no.
And it's almost like they're filming a play on stage. You see virtually the entire room, and they're having this argument as the Macy's Day Parade is happening in the background in New York City in this just beautiful New York apartment. It feels like lightning in the bottle, the same way that you would go see a Broadway play and say, I'm never going to see that performance that exact way again.
I absolutely agree. I thought she was particularly mesmerizing. She had one of those performances where you can feel like her emotional state and her thoughts just emitting from her being. It was such a presence in the movie. And to add on to that, I would say some particular notable scenes were that Thanksgiving Day parade scene. There was a scene that takes place in the cathedral right after his performance that was particularly good, and also a very heart gut-wrenching scene that takes place in bed towards the end of the film. These scenes just packed such an emotional punch. The versatility of her acting in these scenes, as well as the beginning of the movie, I think goes to maybe a bigger point that I have about the movie, and that is the way that this movie evolves both stylistically and acting from the beginning of the film to the end.
Yeah, completely.
This is something you were talking a little bit about earlier in terms of the film styles, and we were discussing a little bit about the beginning of the film and the back half of the film and how they're almost two distinct films. One of the things I love so much is how the filming styles and the cinematography almost changes as life evolves. You know, the beginning of this movie, it has this quick pace, these wide angles. It really paired so well with this youthful energy that the characters had, their readiness to like make a mark on the world that was so apparent. And it reminds me back of my like early 20s when you just have all these big thoughts and these big ideas and these big dreams. And the filming style really captured that. And then as you were talking about later in the filming style becomes slower paced, the angles are more close up. It's really meant to capture the emotional well-being of the characters because that's what's becoming the focus later on in life. Another thing that was very paid attention to was the vernacular in this movie because as this movie begins, I think we're in like the 30s or 40s, and there's a specific style of speaking during that time. And then of course later on in the movie we're in the 70s and maybe early 80s, and speaking is totally different during that time period. And so the amount of detail that Cooper and Singer paid attention to in the dialogue of this film, how it evolved over the course of time, is just so fantastic. And I noticed all those details.
Yeah, completely. We go from these doo-wop songs on the record player to they play an REM song at the end of the film. Well, not during the credits, but while Leonard Bernstein is driving around towards the end of the film. But I totally agree with you. I mean, it has such a wide variety of styles. They have these constantly moving cameras. They have static cameras where necessary. There's an extraordinarily sad shot where someone in the film has passed away, and the way that they communicate that is through a window. When people see the film, they'll know what I'm talking about, but it's a real show don't tell moment that is so much more powerful because of what they're not saying. A lot of times we think of these auteur filmmakers that have a particular style that they bring to every film. You know, Paul Thomas Anderson is one of those filmmakers. And then there's other filmmakers like Martin Scorsese is one that I would think of that he adjusts his style based off the film he's making. And Bradley Cooper, based off two films, seems to be doing that in my mind. He's made two wildly different films with a mastery of different technical styles.
I think I noticed a little bit how the wide sweeping camera motions that were present in the beginning of the movie quickly disappeared and were completely absent from the second half of the film.
Yeah.
But I learned to appreciate it after seeing the second half.
Yeah, it doesn't totally lull you into its second style.
Yeah.
It's around the same time that I think the film drags just a tiny bit from the first hour into the second hour. It's not anything like on the level of a 3.5 hour movie or like Return of the King or something. It's just like this maybe 10-minute segment that could have been a bit tighter.
Yeah, there were a couple of moments where I felt myself just waning with my attention, but then it brought me back in with that Thanksgiving Day scene.
Oh yeah, and then after that is the conducting scene. Yeah, there's like just a couple. There's like a banger every 20 minutes in this movie that really brings you back.
We could talk for a moment a little bit about the other supporting characters in this movie. We have Matt Bomer, who plays David. He plays a somewhat love interest, romantic fling that Bernstein is having. Very interesting how this love story plays out because it's almost known to everybody that him and Matt Bomer are getting together.
The film explores it in ways that I think are really interesting and ambiguous, but doesn't come down to any kind of moral grounds about how to behave about this. But I found it really interesting. I also didn't know this about Leonard Bernstein. I don't know very much about him as a person. How much the film focused on this and dove into it, I found really interesting. If they were making a film about someone who's really important to me, like Bob Dylan or Tom Waits or something, I would be like, well, where's the scene where he was writing Blood on the Tracks? This is crazy that it wasn't in here. I'm not that attached to Leonard Bernstein. I'm here for like every other film that I go see, and I just want to relate to people and learn something about the human experience. And this movie really has that in spades.
And Matt Bomer, I think, did a great job of displaying this regret about his life. I don't know. There was this feeling or of emotion that I got from his performance that it seemed like he wasn't totally happy with where he was going in life. Also, a lovely little performance by Sarah Silverman.
Yeah, when I first saw her, I was like, oh, that's Sarah Silverman. And then I didn't think about it being her for the rest of the film, which I think is a compliment.
So yeah, I thought she was a lovely presence in the movie. I thought she added this really dynamic third wheel element to the marriage of Bernstein and Felicia, which I found to be funny at times and also quite serious at other times. And then also we have Maya Hawke in this movie, which was a lovely surprise. I did not know that was happening, but I thought she was great. She plays one of his eldest daughters, and she did really well in those very intimate, emotional scenes as well.
So you ready to go to grades?
I am ready to go grades. I give Maestro an A-. I really enjoyed this movie, as is apparent by this review. Bradley Cooper in particular, I think, displayed just such an incredible work ethic with this movie. That's like the best way I could put it. Just being able to direct and write and star in it. But he did it with such a high level proficiency, which I already said. I think he just has a really key eye for this stuff. It's so clear that he did so much research in terms of character and the writing and cinema in general, how to shoot these scenes. It's just a level of proficiency which I think just extends himself above A Star is Born in certain regards, but also, as you were saying earlier, I do tend to agree that A Star is Born I found more connecting of a film to me. I don't know, emotionally.
More emotional,
Yeah. Oh, another side note, which I forgot to say, I love how this movie works as a slight companion piece to Tar.
This is part of our ongoing series of mentioning Tar in every review.
We literally had that. And I didn't want to mention Tar in this review because you just mentioned the last one for whatever reason. But
I'm like, hey, this movie is good. You know what's better? Tar.
But this one correlates because Lydia Tarr in Tar, if you're familiar, her inspiration is Leonard Bernstein.
Yeah.
And so what's really cool about that is, since I didn't really know much about Leonard Bernstein himself, this movie illuminated me to some of his character and personality. There was a particular scene towards the end of the movie where Leonard Bernstein is teaching, and I almost saw it as like a direct response to that scene in Tar where Lydia is teaching her group of students.
Yeah.
It was such a clear, distinct difference of how you teach people.
Yeah.
And
completely.
his is so much more welcoming and helpful, and hers was just so dismissive.
Yeah.
It just illuminated in some ways more about that movie that I didn't know because I didn't have a working knowledge of Leonard Bernstein like I do after seeing this in a small way.
I give this an A- as well. I think it's very impressive. That's the word I keep coming back to because I just think there's so much in the film that he's showing a mastery of, whether it's acting, whether it's imitation, whether it's embodiment, whether it's directorial style, whether it's writing. There's just so much to appreciate here. It's been since, I think it's 1991 that both Best Actor and Best Actress went to the same film. And oftentimes that's, I think, a hazard of our filmmaking that we have one great performance in a film and then like the rest of it is supporting. Whereas this film, you could almost see Best Actor and Best Actress going to the same film and it being worthy of both of those awards, because this film is really about that relationship and it's about both performances and their kinship together, so much more so than it is about one or the other. So I'd be really interested to see if that ultimately happens. By the way, I think the last film to do that was Silence of the Lambs. Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins. I think such magnificent performances. I think we're going to see a lot of this during awards time. And frankly, this was a film that reading about it, I was a little cynical about because I was like, oh, Bradley Cooper made such like a good first film and he's going to go make a biopic now. I didn't feel right about it. And I was really happy to be proven wrong.
All right. And that's it for our review of Maestro. Maestro is now in a limited theatrical release, so you could go check it out in the cinema before it's released on Netflix, December 20th. Let us know in the comments, what did you think about Maestro? As always, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.